The classic version of Unity's third principle states, we are co-creators with God, creating reality through thoughts held in mind. As I say each time, there are many versions. You can find one in your program. It echoes Paul's advice in Romans 12:2. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Now, I prefer a slightly expanded version, the kind many Unity communities use, like the one here. The one at Unity of Seattle, Seattle's my original hometown, puts it like this. Human beings create their experiences by the activity of their thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. Everything in the manifest realm has its beginning in consciousness. Right away, we see that we are not focusing on creating the events of life, but rather the experience of it in our consciousness. After all, we can experience prosperity with no bank account or poverty with $1 billion. It's not ultimately about what's out there. We're not magically changing our world. Rather, we're changing our experience of it, which is actually even better, whether we want to admit that or not. Now, as I've been doing in this series, I will look at this principle through a lens of interdependence, how it affects us personally and collectively. The Bible verse that most captures the third principle is Job 22:28. You shall declare a thing, and it shall be so. Now, when we think and declare, feel and believe over time, we create something uniquely human, a story, which helps us shape reality into something cohesive. So I want to explore this topic today because so often we will look at individual thoughts that we hold and try to change them, but we might miss the overarching narrative that those thoughts inhabit. After all, the third principle speaks of changing our experience of life through our state of consciousness. It's not about doing one or two affirmations, checking it off, and calling it a day. So let's look at the stories we create in here. Now, individually, we assemble the story of our lives. We assign other people their roles. We go about telling it to ourselves and others over and over until it might be so well rehearsed that we have little room for alteration or improvisation. In groups, we create and tell stories about who we are in opposition to them, the other, and we agree on who is more important or even better. Historically, we've left large groups out of our stories entirely. People of color, gay people, women over 30. Individually and collectively, these stories become something in the background, kind of like an operating system in a computer with a bug that we don't realize is sapping our energy. Stories matter to us. We fight for our personal stories, and as we're seeing, we fight over our national one as well. We even fight over who Superman is. It matters to people. We love stories because they give us a sense of certainty, making order out of chaos and giving us meaning, a way to feel connected to something again. And that feeling of connection is an antidote to that essential feeling we humans experience of being cut off or alone. With a cohesive narrative, my life has purpose and value, and I belong. Take that away or threaten it, and watch out. As I discuss all of this, I want to be clear, storytelling is a wonderful human capacity using the power of imagination. It's what the third principle is all about. We are, after all, made in the likeness of God. We create realities, worlds. But so often, we've had these background stories, the ones we don't know that we're running. It's important to bring these into our awareness then recreate our narratives consciously because stories have real impact. As the witch says in Into the Woods by Stephen Sondheim, which we just heard, careful the spell you cast, not just on children. Sometimes the spell may last past what you can see and turn against you. Careful the tale you tell. That is the spell. We are authors, and we have authority where? The inner world, which we can make into a heaven or a hell. And I call this spiritual authority. Now, it's not easy to create consciously because so much of our stories run on autopilot. Individually, we see this as 9 to 5, same old, but hey, it works well enough. It feels safer than change, better the devil you know. So we settle, we punch in, punch out, repeat. Or, very often we live in stories other people have written for us, whether it's society or our parents. Or we ask others to live in our story. And when we do this, we violate people's spiritual authority, their free will. On a societal level, freezing our story in another time, or even some mythological idea that never existed, often benefits a few people and costs many. If we don't change our perspective and broaden what's possible, we stay stuck. To wake up from a stagnant story or get out of living in someone else's, we might have to question our inner reality and experience some pain in order to grow. Think of therapy. There might be some crying. Some people might not like it when you change your story. It might change their story about you or about themselves. So there might be some pain, as there is in giving birth, so I hear, or so-called growing pains. And this is true on a societal level too. For example, author Resmaa Menakem says that dismantling racism, dismantling this false narrative of white people as somehow better or the norm, requires walking through our discomfort and processing our pain in a clean way. Not throwing it onto others, but owning and transforming the pain, the trauma, ourselves. It's not always easy, but it's healing, life-changing work that we can do, individually and collectively. Growth requires that we question our stories, or at least stay open to them being questioned, to see beyond whatever thought structure we're in and then make a shift. Our story is like a consciousness infrastructure that we can rebuild. And there's no bipartisan deal necessary. But similar to Congress, we may need to talk to parts of ourselves that don't want to sign on to the new story, the new infrastructure underlying our lives. Now, in Congress, of course, sometimes they yell at the members who don't agree, who won't sign on to the New Deal. You can see how that's working out. With ourselves, kindness is vital, especially to our disowned parts. There's a reason that part of you is scared or resisting change. When you yell at that part, it hides in the unconscious. Those parts are like frightened children. Careful the things you say, children will listen. So let's give ourselves love. Talk to ourselves kindly, especially to those parts that are throwing a tantrum inside of us, acting out in some way because we're trying to change. We can journal. We can dialogue with them to be curious rather than judgmental. We may want to give them a fixed amount of time to let them share within boundaries. But I encourage you not to banish those parts of you. The banished parts often end up writing our stories, or at least editing them. As I mentioned in my last talk, if we learn to love the enemy parts of ourselves and of our society, we bring them into dialogue and heal the shadow. moving towards unity within ourselves and within the world. We exercise spiritual authority when we become conscious of the story, when we see the parts that come from our shadow or that we're copying from others, from our culture or era, and we take responsibility for it all. Then we're not in reaction to life, we're in response from our place of choice, creativity, which is our divine birthright, our power. Taking responsibility means not just talking to those disowned parts, but also working with the elements given, which in this case are facts. We can find new meaning and even gratitude for things in our past without forcing it. We don't get to change the facts of the past, and we're not trying to manipulate the future to some better place. But as we reframe our past, reinterpreting the meaning of each experience, events may shift moving forward in surprising ways to match the new structure of our story, our new perspective. And let's make sure that we're not confusing facts with assumptions, which are thoughts that for whatever reason we hold as true and which so often limit us. Doesn't matter where they came from, but just that they're there, often holding us back. Discovering those assumptions, the fictions behind our stories, is not easy. We don't see them, which is why sometimes it helps to have other people with other perspectives in our lives, like a spiritual community. Now, here's a recent example from my life. For 55 years, more or less, I assumed that I could never own a house. So it wasn't even on my radar. It is not possible, so why waste time considering it? If you'd asked me my reasons, I could give them to you. And here are the top 3. 1, I'm too old. 2, I'm a New York City guy with a job that works for me, which requires me to be in the city. And finally, I can't afford the down payment, especially in the state of New York. But, of course, the state of New York wasn't the issue at all. It was my state of consciousness. The assumptions I held on to, which edited out that possibility from my story. It was pre-rejected. But then, an outside perspective emerged. You see, my fiance Joseph was very eager for us to own a house outside of the city, and although I told him why it was not possible, he persisted. And one by one, my assumptions fell. Because 1, you can get a mortgage at any age. 2, during COVID, I found out I could work from home anywhere, and I asked and they said they'd let me continue doing that as long as I wanted. And then 3, turns out I could borrow from my own 401k for the down payment and just pay myself back. So we looked. We looked in Beacon. That was our dream. But it was way out of our price range. We paused. What about one train stop further? Wappingers Falls. We found the perfect house in our price range. There was a village out front, lake out back. We got really excited. We had a bidding war and lost. Joseph and I got really depressed. In fact, the depression informed us that this house was important to us, surprisingly important. We saw a life there that no other place inspired. So we pushed past our own doubting voices and made a new bid. And this time we attached a letter to the owner, and he accepted our new offer. And the letter, which our real estate broker said, couldn't hurt, I guess, it turned out to be the key. The owner told us that a year later. You see, we did something crucial. Doubting our own negative thoughts. Even doubting the real estate authority, our broker. And after many delays and plot twists, each one inviting doubt right back in, we persisted. And a few months later, we moved into that house that we live in today. Which means I guess I can own a house, because I do, we do. Now, I am not guaranteeing a house if you follow these steps, because each of us has an organic spiritual path, but there are some principles here that I hope will assist you in a practical way. First, I allowed possibility to take place. If I had shut it down, given up, I would have been the one declaring this house impossible. You shall declare a thing and it shall be so. The real estate broker said it's not possible. Another key, I think, is staying open to God's input, our co-author. If we have it all neatly and perfectly written, it has to be in Beacon. Then we may miss out on something more delightful and surprising. Our dream boards and affirmations get our minds going and moving in a direction, but they're not literal demands like ordering from Amazon. In my experience, I say what I like and want, and God, the universe, spirit, surprises me with something that riffs on that and perhaps takes it further, adds an element I didn't expect or know consciously that I even wanted, like the lake. And there may be times when it looks like nothing's going on, but perhaps things are shifting in the background, behind the curtain, and I can keep moving with a degree of faith that my story is in good hands. I'm living in a chapter, but we're writing a novel. I don't know the whole picture yet. And I can enjoy the experience I'm having right now. Sometimes it's helpful, I think, to stop narrating the story, to consciously become more peaceful. Jesus, of course, did this all the time, removing himself from the world and going to that quiet place. Because if we're always narrating without stop, then there's no space for our collaborator to chime in. And it's not fun to collaborate with someone like that. Trust me. When I trust God is good, with a capital G, I stay open to that collaboration and to possibility more easily. I'm not doing it all myself. We can allow that higher energy to come in rather than filling any space in our lives with chatter. We can take that pregnant pause. And this is letting God in. That still small voice can really work miracles. Then we move back into writing mode, and writing requires some editing. Sometimes we can reevaluate and reassess, even recast. As Sondheim wrote, witches can be right, giants can be good. You decide what's right, you decide what's good. You decide because you're the author, collaborating on your own story. And so that's the story of the house. It's a big story, which started as total fiction and ended up as my living reality. House, marriage, me. Wow. But wait, there's more. Now I've saved the really big and extremely current story for the end of my talk, for dramatic purposes. On June 27th, I received a medical diagnosis that shocked me right out of my orbit. It was a partial diagnosis, meaning more tests would be needed to see how serious this was, because it definitely did not feel funny. The tests would occur on July 7th and 11th, and then the doctor would reveal the big news to us on July 17th, just 3 days before I was supposed to talk here, which is the reason I rescheduled for today. Thank you, Teresa. You see, there was a chance that the doctor would look at my story and suggest that it was nearing its end. Then I'd have to pull out all my tools to navigate that and be the grand exception to whatever prognosis he was offering. As my mother reminded me, according to Bernie Siegel, if they tell you you've got a 10% chance of living, find out what those 10% did and become like them. Because that statistic is simply a likelihood, not a fixed reality. Careful the spell you cast. And so as we waited for July 17th, my inner state became interesting, to say the least. Thank God truly for Unity teachings, because I was able to allow the so-called negative thoughts to pass through without giving them lots of attention, and to stay for much of the time in a state of possibility. Even as parts of me kind of shook from time to time. I knew that was natural, and I had people to talk it through with, to pray, or just talk. And I guarded my story, choosing who to share it with, knowing some people have strong opinions that could disorient me. My consciousness meant the world to me in a tangible way. I forgave some messiness on my part. Joseph and I had our own stories and strategies for managing them, for trying not to stress the other person out. It can get complicated. And again, thank God for spiritual tools and spiritual friends. So finally, July 17th came. And after waiting an extra couple of hours in the waiting room, because why not make that day as dramatic and drawn out as possible, the doctors came in. And it became clear, ever so slowly, that they were optimistic, that they had a specific course of healing, which they had confidence in. They weren't promising that the path would be easy, but it was real. And we felt not just hope, but what I'll call certain hope, a hope that feels grounded. As I say, there are some big steps to come on this healing journey, and probably some surprises. And we will have opportunities to take each fact and weave it into a story or many possible stories. The key, I think, is to choose and intend, to stay centered and open and real with feelings, to notice the fears without indulging or repressing them. Then over and over, lean into the best possible story we can imagine. Because that will not just change our lives, really it will be our lives. The story we tell is that important. I opened today with a quote from Romans 12:2 by Paul. That same passage, according to the Passion Translation, reads, "Stop imitating the ideals and opinions of the culture around you, but be inwardly transformed by the Holy Spirit through a total reformation of how you think. This will empower you to discern God's will as you live a beautiful life." To facilitate that inner transformation, we have spiritual tools like prayer, meditation, affirmations, which I'll get into next time, getting specific on what these are and how we can use them in our daily life. That is principle 4. For now, please remember, you have spiritual authority as much as any king or queen, and a very well-connected collaborator, eager to help you here and now, always. You create the experience of your life in each moment and over time. So write your story consciously, compassionately, with joy and even zeal. Clear the page. Breathe. create. It's an open book. Thank you.